The glass towers of Hartley Enterprises pierced the evening skyline like silver spears, their mirrored walls reflecting the fiery hues of sunset that slowly bled into the city below. Inside, the last echoes of ringing phones and hurried footsteps faded away as the day's chaos surrendered to silence. Most employees had already gone home to their warm apartments and well-earned rest, but one man remained. His name was Ethan Cole, though few at the company even knew it. To most, he was simply the janitor, the quiet man who appeared when the lights dimmed, pushing his cleaning cart through the gleaming corridors like a ghost haunting the glass and steel. Ethan moved with an almost meditative calm, the soft squeak of his mop echoing through the marble lobby. He wore the same gray uniform every night, pressed, neat, though frayed at the collar. His brown hair, streaked with the faintest touch of gray, fell slightly over his eyes as he worked, and his hands, steady and precise, handled even the most mundane tasks with care. There was no hint of complaint in him, no sign of bitterness at the world. He worked methodically, like a man who found solace in order and rhythm. From her corner office on the top floor, Claire Hartley, the CEO herself, sat behind a mountain of paperwork and the soft glow of her laptop. She wasn't supposed to be there so late. She had everything a person could ever want, a sprawling penthouse uptown, a private driver, and more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes. Yet she stayed, not out of necessity but out of restlessness. Success had come easily to her, too easily, and with it, a loneliness that clung to her like a second skin. It was during one of those late nights that she first noticed Ethan. She'd been gazing out the window, half lost in thought, when her eyes caught movement below him, pushing his cart, pausing occasionally to look out into the city as though searching for something beyond the glass. There was nothing remarkable about him at first glance, but there was a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself, a stillness that seemed out of place in a world built on noise and ambition. Claire began noticing him more often. The way he bowed his head slightly when passing others in the hallway, even when no one returned the gesture. The way he wiped every desk surface like he was polishing memories instead of tables. He never spoke unless spoken to, but when he did, his voice was low, warm, and oddly self-assured, too self-assured for a man in his position. One evening, as she was heading out of her office, she saw him kneeling to pick something up, a small photograph that had slipped from his pocket. He caught it before she could get a good look, but not before she saw a flash of 2 smiling faces, children, perhaps. The way his hand lingered on that photograph, his thumb brushing over it tenderly, told her it meant everything to him. After that, she couldn't stop wondering. Who was he? Why did a man with eyes that sharp and posture that disciplined work as a janitor in her building? He was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. Every night, she'd catch the faint sound of his footsteps at exactly 11:47 p.m., the time he clocked out. He'd sling his old backpack over one shoulder and disappear into the night without a word. Curiosity began to grow inside her, a curiosity she couldn't explain. Claire Hartley didn't chase after anyone. She was the one people followed, admired, envied. Yet something about Ethan Cole didn't fit the pattern of her world. He wasn't like the others who fawned over her title or money. He existed entirely outside of her universe, and somehow, that intrigued her more than she wanted to admit. That night, as thunder rolled across the horizon and rain began to pour against the massive glass panes of her office, she stood by the window again. Down below, through the dim glow of the lobby lights, she saw Ethan pushing his cart toward the exit, stopping briefly to zip up his jacket. Then, as the heavy doors swung open and the storm swallowed him, Claire made a decision she didn't quite understand. The rain had thickened into a shimmering curtain that blurred the edges of the city, softening even its harshest corners. Claire Hartley's wipers swept frantically across the windshield as her sleek black Mercedes glided through the empty streets. Her knuckles whitened around the steering wheel, a mixture of nerves and disbelief running through her veins. She couldn't quite explain what had driven her to this, to following her janitor into the night like some obsessed detective. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe, deep down, it was the aching loneliness she never dared to acknowledge. Up ahead, Through the streaks of rain and hazy reflections, she could see the faint glow of Ethan Cole's taillights. He drove an old, battered pickup truck that looked wildly out of place next to the luxury vehicles she was used to seeing in her circle. The contrast struck her, the billionaire CEO in her custom leather seat and the janitor in a truck that coughed smoke with every turn. Yet, for reasons she couldn't explain, she kept following. Ethan drove steadily, never too fast, taking backroads that wound through neighborhoods Claire had only ever read about in headlines. The skyscrapers gave way to small, tired buildings with flickering streetlights. The roads grew narrower, the puddles deeper. She lowered the heat slightly, her breath fogging the window as she pressed forward. He finally slowed and turned into a worn-out apartment complex with cracked pavement and peeling paint. The sign out front read Ridgeview Homes, though the word homes felt more like a prayer than a truth. Claire parked a few spaces away, killing her headlights. Through the misty drizzle, she watched him step out of his truck, a grocery bag in one hand and his backpack slung over his shoulder. His steps were quick, careful, as if he was racing the weather. She expected him to disappear behind one of the doors and close it quietly, but before he reached the building, the door burst open. A small figure came running out barefoot into the rain, a little girl with tangled brown hair and a giggle that seemed to cut through the storm. "Daddy," she cried, her arms flinging around his legs. Ethan's face broke into a smile so genuine it seemed to light up the entire dark courtyard. He bent down, scooping her into his arms just as another child, a boy slightly older, came running after her, clutching a small toy airplane. Claire froze, her chest tightening as she watched them. The janitor she had seen as quiet, almost distant, suddenly transformed before her eyes. There was a warmth in him now, a tenderness that didn't belong to the world she knew, a world of boardrooms and balance sheets. He looked like a man who carried the weight of everything he loved and yet still found the strength to smile. The little girl buried her face in his neck, laughing as he spun her around despite the rain. The boy tugged at his sleeve, showing him the broken wing of his toy. Ethan kneeled down, examining it with mock seriousness before promising, "We'll fix it together tomorrow, champ." The words were ordinary, but the way he said them, soft, patient, full of love, hit her harder than she expected. She could have driven away right then. She should have. But she couldn't. She stayed, watching as he led his children inside. A dim light flickered through the small apartment window. From her car, she could just make out the silhouettes, the girl dancing, the boy jumping onto a worn-out couch, Ethan setting the groceries on the counter. It was a simple life, but there was laughter. Real laughter. Something Claire hadn't heard in her own home for years. Her phone buzzed beside her, an incoming call from her assistant. She ignored it. For the first time, the endless meetings, profits, and deadlines seemed meaningless compared to the scene unfolding in that small, shabby apartment. As she sat in silence, rain tapping gently against the glass, she thought of her own life, the penthouse overlooking the city, the glass of wine she drank alone every night, the people who respected her title but never really knew her. Watching Ethan and his children through that rain-streaked window, she felt something stir deep inside, a strange blend of admiration and ache. She didn't know who Ethan Cole really was or what story had brought him to this place, but she knew one thing for certain, she couldn't stop now. There was more to this man than his uniform or his mop bucket. And for reasons she couldn't yet understand, she needed to know what it was. With a final glance at the flickering light in his window, Claire turned her key and drove off into the night. Heart pounding, mind racing, utterly unaware that this small act of curiosity was about to change both their lives forever. The following morning, Claire tried to drown herself in work. The board meeting stretched for hours, numbers and graphs filling the projector screen while the voices around her blended into static. She nodded at all the right times, approved proposals, signed contracts, yet her thoughts drifted again and again to that rain-soaked apartment and the man who lived there. The image of Ethan lifting his little girl in his arms replayed like a song she couldn't turn off. It disturbed her, this fascination. She told herself it was just curiosity, maybe even pity. But deep down, she knew it wasn't either. It was something more unsettling, a recognition, perhaps, that the life of that janitor carried a wholeness her own billion-dollar world lacked. That night, the city lay under a thick blanket of fog. Claire sat in her car once again, engine idling a few blocks from Ridgeview Homes. Her heart pounded as she debated whether to leave. She wasn't sure what she was hoping to find, only that she needed to understand who Ethan Cole really was. When he finally appeared, locking his apartment door and stepping out quietly into the night, she instinctively ducked low in her seat. He wasn't carrying his usual cleaning cart or backpack, just a small black duffel. He walked quickly across the street, heading toward a narrow alley beside the building. Curiosity overrode reason. Claire slipped out of her car, pulling the hood of her coat over her head, and followed him at a distance. Her heels were useless on the cracked pavement, so she kicked them off and walked barefoot, her breath fogging in the cold. Ethan approached a small, run-down shed behind the complex and unlocked it with a key. A faint light flickered inside as the door creaked open. Claire crept closer, stopping just outside the thin wooden wall. She peeked through a gap, and what she saw made her forget to breathe. Inside wasn't a storage shed at all, it was a makeshift clinic. The space was cramped but astonishingly organized. Shelves of medical books, bottles of antiseptic, and rolls of gauze lined the walls. A small cot stood in the corner, next to an old but clean examination table. And sitting on that cot was a frail woman, her skin pale but her eyes kind. Ethan knelt beside her, gently taking her hand. "You're getting stronger, Sarah," he murmured, his tone warm but weary. "Just keep holding on, all right? The kids need you." Claire's breath caught. Sarah. His wife. She looked ill, very ill. There was something in her face that spoke of pain long endured, and yet the way Ethan looked at her was full of love and hope, not despair. He checked her pulse with practiced ease, adjusted her blanket, and prepared a small vial of medicine with a precision that only one kind of person could possess, a doctor. When he turned to place the medicine back on the shelf, Claire realized the truth. The calm, steady hands. The way he moved, deliberate and confident. This wasn't just a man who had learned to care. This was a man who had been trained to heal. Her mind raced. A janitor by day, a doctor in secret. But why? The old floor creaked under her shifting weight, and Ethan's head snapped up. His eyes darted to the door, narrowing in suspicion. Before she could retreat, it swung open. Their gazes locked, rain and moonlight pooling between them. "Miss Hartley," he said, his voice low but steady. "Why are you here?" She froze, words tumbling uselessly in her throat. I didn't mean to intrude," she stammered. I saw you, and what is this place?" He sighed, stepping aside. "It's where I try to help those who can't afford a hospital," he said quietly. "I used to be a surgeon. Until my wife got sick, and the bills took everything." His eyes flickered toward Sarah, who gave Claire a weak smile. "Now I do what I can, here." Claire felt her throat tighten. In that moment, her world of privilege and polished floors collided with his world of sacrifice and silent struggle. The man she'd followed out of idle curiosity now stood before her as someone extraordinary, someone whose worth couldn't be measured by wealth or status. She didn't know what to say, only that her heart ached in a way it hadn't in years. Ethan turned away, adjusting a bandage on Sarah's arm. "If you're here to report me, I understand," he said without bitterness. "But I couldn't just stop helping people. It's all I know how to do." Claire shook her head, her voice trembling. "No," she whispered. "I'm not here to report you. I'm here because I think I've just discovered something I was never meant to overlook." And as she stood in that dimly lit room filled with both sorrow and grace, Claire Hartley realized she had just opened a door that would change her life, and his, forever. The days following that night blurred together for Claire Hartley. She went through the motions of her corporate empire, meetings, reports, interviews, but her mind was miles away, back in that dimly lit clinic where a janitor had shown her what true humanity looked like. The image of Ethan tending to his frail wife haunted her. His hands, steady, kind, practiced, belonged to a man born to heal, not to polish marble floors. His story had cracked something deep inside her, a quiet shattering of everything she thought she knew about success, worth, and purpose. For years, Claire had prided herself on being unshakable, a woman who built her empire from brilliance and steel. But now, she couldn't shake the feeling that her empire was hollow, a cathedral built on emptiness. A week passed before she finally gathered the courage to act. Late one evening, as the city lights flickered to life below her office window, Claire stood with a manila folder in her hands. Ethan Cole's past laid bare within it. She had used her company's resources to find everything she could about him. Former trauma surgeon. Graduated top of his class at Stanford. Married young. Left the profession after a malpractice case that wasn't even his fault. His wife's medical bills had forced him to sell their home, their car, everything. When she closed the file, her throat tightened. The world had failed a man like him, and she'd been part of that same system. But no longer. She wasn't just going to pity him, she was going to change his life the way he had unknowingly changed hers. That night, she drove back to Ridgeview Homes, the same worn-down complex where the story had begun. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint hum of the city in the distance. Her luxury car looked painfully out of place among the rusted vehicles and cracked asphalt, but she didn't care. She climbed the narrow staircase and stopped in front of the faded green door she had once watched him enter. Her heart pounded as she knocked. The door opened slowly, revealing Ethan, tired, cautious, and confused to see her standing there. "Miss Hartley," he said softly. "Is everything all right?" Claire smiled, though her nerves trembled beneath it. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "But I think it's about to be." He stepped aside, allowing her in. The apartment was small but warm, 2 children's drawings taped to the fridge, a few second-hand toys scattered across the floor, and the soft hum of a heater working overtime. His wife, Sarah, sat on the couch, her blanket drawn around her shoulders, her smile fragile but kind. "I went through your old records," Claire began, her voice careful. "Your license was never revoked. It was only suspended. That means you can be reinstated, with help." She handed him the folder. "And I want to help." Ethan blinked, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "Why?" he asked after a moment. "You don't owe me anything." Claire took a breath, her voice trembling. "Because I saw what you do when no one's watching. I saw what kind of man you are. And I realized that maybe, all the money and power in the world means nothing if people like you are left to sweep floors." He stood silent for a long moment, emotion flickering across his face. Behind him, his little girl peeked from behind the couch, clutching her brother's hand. Claire smiled softly at them and knelt, pulling 2 small boxes from her bag, books, crayons, and a plush teddy bear. "These are for you," she said. The children's eyes lit up, their joy small but radiant. Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek. "You don't know what this means to us," she whispered. Claire shook her head gently. "I think I do. Because somewhere along the way, I forgot what it meant to matter." Months later, the once abandoned wing of St. Gabriel's Hospital reopened as the Hartley Free Care Center, a place where struggling families could receive treatment without cost. And standing at its grand opening beside the CEO herself was Ethan Cole, no longer a janitor, but the center's lead physician. Cameras flashed, applause echoed, and yet, when their eyes met across the crowd, it was quiet understanding that passed between them. That night, after the ceremony, Claire stood in the hallway outside the clinic's main door, the same kind of door she had once followed him through, the same threshold that had changed everything. Ethan joined her, his hands in his pockets, a faint smile on his lips. "You didn't have to do all this," he said softly. "I did," she replied. Because sometimes, we don't realize we're lost until someone else shows us the way. He nodded, his gaze distant but grateful. And as the doors of the new clinic opened to welcome their first patients, Claire felt something stir deep inside her, a warmth, a peace she had never known. The door she had once followed out of curiosity had led her to compassion. And in helping Ethan reclaim his purpose, she had finally discovered her own.